of Business, Director of the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at the University of Minnesota Duluth. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name is John Bennett. I'm with University of Minnesota Extension. I'm with a place called the Center for Community Viability, which is on the St. Paul campus, but I live and work out of Duluth and work all over Northeast Minnesota. I'm a community economics educator and focus my work with my center, which is the Center for Community Vitality. So thanks everyone for having us here today.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. Jordan mentioned that this project has been going on for the past year, which is true, but actually the initial impetus for this project started many years ago. Jordan and I first met probably 5 years ago now. And we had the idea for kind of an economic study of this potential I-35 conversion many years ago, but felt like the timing wasn't quite right. And, we wanted to do some more groundwork, Jordan wanted to do some more groundwork on the project before we, went into a deeper dive on the economic side of things. But then last year, we submitted a grant application to the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation to study the economic effects of a potential I-35 conversion through downtown Duluth, and they graciously funded the grant application. So we were able to do this research through their donations. And then John was involved through an EDA funded grant. So we want to make sure we acknowledge the funders that helped make this research possible. And then we also got a donation from the Upper Midwest Institute of Architects. I'm probably botching that name, the AIA. Jordan, what does it stand for?
That's the American Institute of Architects, and it was the Northern Minnesota chapter, I believe.
Thank you very much. So yes, those donations all helped support this research. So we were looking not at any one particular design for the corridor. I just want to make that clear. We weren't necessarily looking at the Duluth Waterfront Collective's design concept, but more generally interested in understanding what a potential conversion of I-35 could look like in terms of the economic development opportunities and in terms of what the community felt were its priorities for greater connectivity and kind of economic development initiatives that people in the community might prioritize. So that's what we were primarily aiming to capture. And then we did that through a variety of methods. Okay, so again, our organization, the Bureau of Business and Economic Research, and John Bennett is with Extension. And this is the study area that we were examining. So we were looking at all of downtown Duluth up until the tunnels, and then west to Mesaba Avenue. So we were really interested in this focus area, looking at some of the strengths and weaknesses of the region and what are some economic development potential opportunities if a conversion were to happen. So the way that we did the project was we did surveys and interviews with key stakeholders in the downtown area. So we would talk to business owners, representatives from the library and the DEC and other large entities that are located in downtown and the central business district and Canal Park. We talked to some economic development representatives in the area and other community members that were interested in the project. So it was partly a kind of snowball sample in terms of we just started with some names that we felt were important to include. And then as we talked to people, we always asked, who else should we include in our conversation? And then, of course, Jordan promoted the survey on social media as well as our organization's social media. So those were kind of the ways in which we reached out to the people we spoke to. We also did case studies of other communities around the country that have completed similar types of projects and looked at the economic development impacts that occurred in those communities. And we did an literature review, which included studies of freeway right-sizing projects and kind of some of the motivations and necessary conditions that are needed to make these types of projects happen. And in terms of the framework that we used, the US DOT actually had a study that they examined in 2018 that looked specifically at economic development and highway right-sizing. And they laid out kind of a best practice in terms of how communities.
Ozzy, no, Ozzy.
They had a framework for how communities should approach these types of projects. And so we loosely followed their framework as a guide for how we did our own research. John, do you want to add any more in here?
I do, yeah, I just want to sort of point out that, you know, in particular, we were really focused on public involvement. I was really interested in public involvement, and we knew that it's an important and necessary part of this right-sizing process, which is what we're going to be talking about. And this economic development and highway right-sizing framework that Monica is talking about, actually, you know, it sort of spells out in there how to involve the public in this kind of work, and it sort of matches up pretty well with a lot of the work that's and the theory that I see in the community development field. So they kind of went go hand in hand, which was a good thing. So our best practices state that public involvement efforts should be grounded, they should be purposeful, specific, and productive, and participants in this should be engaged in all stages of the planning process. The focus should be on finding out the public's point of view on this versus just looking for a solution. So a big part of this project was, you know, the economic impact research, but we wanted to make sure that we sort of set the table in the right way to be able to do our due diligence in this public involvement and kind of community engagement, which we'll talk about a little bit more.
One thing we should mention too is that many of you are aware that the Metropolitan Interstate Council is actually undertaking a corridor study right now, and part of what they're doing is looking at the potential future uses in the downtown area. And part of their goal at this time is to really get a sense for what the community priorities are. And so we are planning to share this information with their research team to help inform some of the plans that they are currently working on. Okay. So, John, do you want to talk about the survey and interview process?
Yep. So for this study, we developed a series of questions designed to elicit feedback from local stakeholders and the broader public. The questions asked about the individual's level of support for a potential redesign of the I-35 corridor, what the reasons might be to support the project, and also any reservations or concerns they have about a redesign. The questions also asked individuals to consider characteristics of downtown Duluth and what they would hope to see change or retained if a redesign were to occur. Also, which stakeholder groups we wanted to know which stakeholder groups they felt might be positively or negatively impacted by a right-sizing project. And also, finally, we wanted to ask about economic development priorities for the area, for the downtown Duluth area. To do that, we worked with a a research team. We put together a research team, which we'll show you in a couple of slides here. But we wanted to identify specific stakeholders that should be interviewed. The stakeholders included members of the business community with special interest and knowledge about Duluth's downtown waterfront area, such as small business owners. Monica mentioned some of these earlier, property managers, representatives of the tourism and freight industries, and transportation professionals. So so we had these virtual interviews, which went very well, and we generally did them in teams of two, either Monica and I, or we did it with somebody who was part of our advisory team. Then we also had a Qualtrics online survey that had 109 responses. We did we used a community engagement tool or activity, and we set up a table at Sidewalk Days where we wanted to elicit feedback from people who were visiting Sidewalk Days, and we tried to lure them over and come talk to us a little bit about their priorities for the downtown area. And for the Qualtrics surveys, it was and the virtual interviews, it was a mix of multiple choice and open-ended questions. So more with the survey and the interviews and the stakeholders, we asked about a level of support for the redesign. As I mentioned earlier, the reasons for the support, the reservations or concerns, the economic development priorities, and what the impacts will be to the stakeholders. Okay. Yeah, so this next one, we wanted to make sure that community engagement was a key strategy for this particular research study. You know, we know community leaders, community members, and researchers increasingly we're starting to recognize that engaging communities in research and evaluation is critical. It's critical for implementing effective programs and building trust. Research and communities also recognize the value of community engaged research to improve the rigor and the relevance of the research and evaluation, and also better understand the historical and, you know, other ongoing systemic inequities, bad things that may have happened from, you know, earlier research, or just, you know, bad planning in general, or just the way that we used to know how to do planning and what we've learned since then. So engaging communities in research and evaluation, especially when identifying the right research questions, was really important. So we wanted to recruit a research team and study participants who could really help us put these survey designs together. We also know that when we put an advisory team like this together, it sort of helps people understand, you know, the local people who need to understand what we're talking about may understand it a little bit more than if they weren't involved, which sort of makes the implementation of this easier. When these research projects are done, well, Monica and I both live here, so we'll be around, but we want to make sure that hopefully this thing has some legs to it and has some champions. So as you can see here, we put together what we feel is a pretty strong advisory team that we could not have done this work without, and we owe them a lot of gratitude, and they really helped shape the research questions that we want to ask and the manner which we went ahead and asked them about it.
Yeah, I just want to also say about the advisory team, part of the reason we included the agencies that we did is because if anyone is going to be using this research moving forward, it will be MnDOT, the MIC, and the City of Duluth. You know, if there's a decision to do further research in this area, or to potentially look for a federal grant to do a transportation planning project, they are the entities that would be making those decisions. So we wanted to make sure that when we were designing the research, that it would be, the final product would be something that would be useful to them.
Okay. This is our table at Sidewalk Days, and you can see Monica and myself there, and I've got my two kids, which I used on one of the mornings to help lure people over to our table, which I don't know if that's it helped us or distracted us more, but anyway, it worked. So over these 2 days of tabling, we got some really good feedback from folks who attended Sidewalk Days. And we asked attendees to share their thoughts on downtown Duluth using the same questions, kind of similar questions that we used in the survey, which was, in your opinion, which of the following should community leaders prioritize for the downtown waterfront area? And rather than distributing a survey at Sidewalk Days, we set up a table with 7 jars labeled with the same 7 options: tourism, shopping, dining, housing, office or workplace, connection to the water, improved public safety, and parks and trails. And participants who stopped by the table were given a small cup with 10 beans in it that could be distributed into the jars that the participants chose as their priorities. So this was not research that we did, but it was really useful in that we were able to have many conversations about this topic with people. And by doing something that's a little bit more engaging, by giving them a Dixie cup with 10 beans in it and asking them the question and saying, I want you to really think about how you're going to, spread out your beans here. You can throw them all into one, you can break it up into 2, or you can spread them out equally. So it wasn't just asking a question and asking for a response. We really had to get people to start thinking about this. And as they were thinking about it, they started asking us some questions, and these questions is kind of where we started jotting down notes. And these notes are sort of a big part of what informed a good part of the rest of the research that was done. So with that, the priorities that we learned from this community engagement tool or this strategy were a bit different than the actual survey responses that we got back through the official research. So community priorities for folks who were attending Sidewalk Days, public safety was ranked the highest, followed closely by parks and trails. And you can see it's different than the folks when we asked Duluthians in general, or community leaders and stakeholders, or anyone else who took the survey who might have some kind of a vested interest in this, what their priorities were. So, it's important to sort of, when we're thinking about large projects like this and how we do the outreach and engagement, it's critical to think of what these different views and perspectives are. So you can see here, I don't need to read all of these off, but the gold is the responses from the Sidewalk Days respondents, and the maroon is the survey interview participants. So you can kind of see where they aligned on some and they were quite different on others.
I would also say this kind of helps us to also realize that, the amount of community engagement that we did for this project is really just a very first step, because seeing how different these different stakeholder groups responded to this question just shows us that, we can't just assume that the interviews that we did represent the full population of Duluth, or represent, all of the different entities that might be impacted by a potential redevelopment. Because, clearly, if you were talking to just economic development professionals and kind of the more engaged, educated participants that are more aware of the project and maybe have a more vested interest in downtown, you might say, oh, connection to the waterfront is by far the most important priority. But when you're talking to just the average person on the street, they might have a very different impression. So it does make us realize that it's important to do more community engagement efforts in this area before a final decision is made on, what that downtown redesign might look like, or what the goals for the redesign might be. So John, anything more that you want to say about the engagement activities?
So why don't you go ahead and, let's get into the case studies there.
So, as Jordan said at the beginning of our introduction, we also looked at a few different cities around the country that have done similar right sizing projects. And according to the US DOT framework that we were using, the three most important steps when applying case studies are, first, to identify similar completed projects, profile of each case study, and then assess the applicability of the case study. So that was the approach we tried to take for our own project. We identified through various sources in the literature and other web sources, we identified 36 potential examples worldwide, 19 of which were in the US. And we chose 5 that we thought were most similar to Duluth in some way. We ranked them we evaluated them based on if they had some proximity to the waterfront, the size of the community, and then some other characteristics, like whether they were located in the Midwest. Trying to remember, there was maybe one other characteristic, but if they met 2 out of the 3 characteristics, then we included them as a case study. So these were the 5 cities that we looked at: the Riverfront Parkway in Chattanooga, which is the top image, the Park East Freeway in Milwaukee, I-35 Expressway in Providence, Rhode Island, the Interloop Expressway in Rochester, and the Robert Moses Parkway in Niagara Falls. And these are actually the list that you see here, the 5 of these are organized in the order in which they occurred. So the dates aren't shown on the slide, but the Riverfront Parkway occurred between 2001 and 2005. The Rochester, New York project is much more recent, was just completed in 2017. And the Robert Moses Parkway project is also a fairly recently completed project. So while all of the projects had been fully completed at the time of our research, some of them had just completed fairly, within the past few years, and that proved to be very important in when we looked at the impacts from these projects that ended up being one of the biggest factors in terms of their what they had seen in the communities. So what we found from our research is that in general, all of these projects saw some really significant economic development investments as a result, or maybe not as a result, but following the project, they all saw significant economic development investments, the largest being Milwaukee, where they saw about $1 billion of private investment since the Park East removal project, about 250 million of which are still remaining. Providence, Rhode Island saw about $670 million of new investment. But what we found was that some of these projects that are more recent, even 10 years might seem like a long time, but in terms of economic development investments, many of these projects still had undeveloped parcels or were still working on doing the economic development investments in the community. And so what we learned is that many of these investments can take many years, if not decades, to fully materialize. And the results, the amount of economic development activity really reflected kind of the strategy or priority of the community, which obviously, I guess might not be surprising, but for example, the Robert Moses Parkway in Niagara Falls, they really prioritized turning that space into open space and parkland. They expanded the state park that bordered that region. And so for them, the economic development activity that occurred following the project was much smaller because they were prioritizing green space and park space as opposed to trying to spur economic activity. So definitely the strategy that the community takes has a big impact on the amount of economic development investment they see. So then one of the big pieces of our research was to identify the motivations and necessary conditions that existed in many of the communities where these right sizing projects happened, and then to evaluate kind of the situation in Duluth based on the literature, based on feedback from our advisory team, and based on the interviews and community engagement efforts that we did. So what we learned from the literature is that these 9, 10, looks like 11, 11 factors were kind of some of the most likely motivations for communities that have undertaken some type of right sizing project, whether it's a freeway removal project or maybe a narrowing of the roadway in the community. But in the case of these different projects, these are typically the factors that exist that are the reasons behind that change. So either the freeway has damage and deterioration, or the freeway is obsolete for some reason, so it doesn't have much traffic. The community might be prioritizing connecting neighborhoods that had been displaced or that had seen the freeway cut through a neighborhood. They may have been prioritizing economic development and revitalization in a neighborhood, or there was demand from the local community or from some party in power. Oftentimes there was some large window of opportunity, like an earthquake or some major urgent event that caused some need to either remove or remodel the freeway. That's not the right word, but there's some window of opportunity that occurs that creates this opportunity to reconsider the existing structure of the freeway. Typically the project must be financially viable. There's usually a strong advocate for the project, and there must be support in the community, either through business support or academic association support. So according to the literature, maybe not every single one of these conditions has to be in place, but in general, these are the conditions that are going to be most likely for the project to be successful. And by successful, meaning that some right sizing would happen. So what we did upon completing the project, we went back through all of the research that we did and the conversations that we had with stakeholders and with our advisory team, and what we learned from the literature, and then kind of tried to determine as much as we could whether we felt like that condition or situation was present in Duluth. And so these next few slides, I'm just going to walk through each of the criteria and then talk about the conditions in Duluth. And again, we acknowledge our research is just a small piece of the puzzle. So there might be, some people might argue, well, that's not how I see the condition in Duluth, and I'm happy to, we'll talk about that later. But anyway, this is, so currently the damage and deterioration, according to MnDOT, there is no need to immediately replace the downtown segment. They feel that the life of the downtown corridor should be in the range of, 80 years, potentially upwards of more than that. And the current life or the current age of the freeway is about 50 years, 40 years. So, but yet there are certain segments of the corridor through downtown that do need to be replaced in the next 10 or 20 years, including the Fifth Avenue West Bridge. So there are some opportunities potentially to consider the design at points closer in the future. In terms of obsolescence, the downtown Duluth segment of I-35 is definitely not heavily trafficked. It is down from its peak in 1998, 30,000 at the moment. So while there is some traffic in the downtown area surrounding, and especially at certain intersections, immediately getting onto the freeway or getting off, according to most of the research, the freeway itself is not heavily trafficked. So that is kind of a check mark in terms of, yes, Duluth could be a good candidate because the freeway itself is not heavily trafficked. Neighborhood connectivity definitely emerged as one of the main drivers from our conversations. We had lots of open-ended comments in the survey that were like this. People talking about I-35 being a divide between downtown and the waterfront, and dividing two of the most important and vibrant parts of the city, and wanting to see some of that connection returned. So that was definitely a strong theme through the conversations that we had, not just with the business community, but with the residents as well. In our interviews, we did coded all of the qualitative feedback that we got from the interviews, and so economic development emerged as the most common reason for people that said they were supportive of the project. People saw this as an opportunity to bring some new economic development potential into the downtown area and make the region more vibrant, potentially spurring housing or tourism development opportunities. So that was very much one of the strongest reasons for supporting the redesign. In terms of the reasons why people were not supportive, that would definitely, the strongest reasons for those who were hesitant or not supportive was transportation concerns by far. In terms of local community demand, of the survey responses that we got, actually a majority were very supportive. And then the next largest category were supportive, but with reservations. And like I mentioned before, I think the most common reservations that people had were that the project or a redesign might lead to transportation slowdowns or more congestion. There was concern about freight traffic. There was concern just about kind of lack of information about the project or a design, future design. So definitely still some hesitation among many people that we talked to, but in general, most of the feedback that we got was fairly supportive, as you can see. One of the main barriers, I think, in terms of what we found is that at this time, there is no entity in power in terms of the mayor's office or a powerful lobbying organization that has come out strongly in favor of the project. So many people were supportive, but their organizations specifically might not be voicing support from a kind of official standpoint. So that's an area where we see there being a big gap in terms of Duluth's viability. The Reconnecting Communities pilot program that was just passed at the federal level could provide a window of opportunity from a funding standpoint. But given the timing and need for redesign in terms of like MnDOT's timing, that might be challenging just because of the fact that it is not in need of urgent repair. And then in terms of the financial viability, that program does require a minimum non-federal match of 20%. So whatever cost for the redesign would require some non-federal match. We see the Duluth Waterfront Collective obviously as the current advocate for the tear down, although there are other organizations that are advocating for it, but in terms of the strongest advocate, that would be this organization. When we met with stakeholders, one of the questions was how do they identify, like with what organization or area do they identify? And some of the options were economic development, resident or community member, educational, business. What else am I missing, John?
I think you got it. But I just want to point out here that I think the business side of things, we did a pretty good job with stakeholders, and we opened up this survey to get some feedback from residents, but some direct feedback from business owners, through some type of canvas or survey at some points for this project would probably be a pretty smart idea.
Yeah, I was going to say, we had 16 individuals that specifically identified as private business. So not a huge number. But of those, none of them said they were not supportive. So either 7 indicated they were very supportive, and then the remaining 9 said they were either moderately supportive or supportive with reservations. And as for academic support, again, not a huge number in terms of the quantity of people that we surveyed that were specifically education, but over half were very supportive. There was 1 that was not supportive, and then the remaining 4 were moderately supportive or supportive with reservations. So in terms of our next steps, we are going to be sharing the study more broadly. We're going to be trying to do some more outreach and presentations with the results. Bolton and Mank is the organization or company that I mentioned earlier that's doing the corridor study with the Metropolitan Interstate Council. And so they will be incorporating these results in with their planning study, but their study results will be coming out this summer. And so that will be another opportunity to kind of think about what the community priorities are. And then we're hoping to potentially continue the research with a MnDOT research needs statement, which would allow for some additional study in this area. But we're also open to suggestions. We'd be happy to hear what people see as being, more of a research need, or, what we've missed, I guess.
I just want to throw out here, Monica, as part of sharing our results more broadly and the outreach and presentations, just because of the group that we're talking to here today, which I'm guessing there are a handful of planners or people who are sort of interested or in that field generally. We submitted a a session proposal to a group called the Community Development Society, which is sort of my home association for practitioners who work in community development from more of like an academic theory base. And we're hoping to go out and present this in Portland this summer, sort of under the with the theme of, you know, for those of us who are in community planning, there's a lot of talk about remember how we were trained and used to do things a long time ago, and now we need to do it really different. That's sort of how we're pitching this as a, pitching this as a different way to do community research that involves the community and in a bigger way. So we're hoping for that to happen. But otherwise, yeah, we're open to suggestions for anyone on the call here who might know.
Yeah, and then just lastly, again, we want to make sure we acknowledge our funders for the project. So that is what we have to share with all of you, but we'd be happy to take any questions or talk about your thoughts and open it up.
Jordan, maybe you can or Monica, if you could close the presentation, we might be able to see if there are any hands up or any questions.
Oh, I have a question. Are you planning to integrate with the Northern Lights Express if funded, creating a destination station area at the depot? That's a great question. We did not incorporate the Northern Lights Express at the time that we did the research, but that would be a great addition to think about how that might play into the economic development potential.
I can just add, I mean, this specific study didn't necessarily look at the concept proposed by our group. It was more kind of a general what we could expect if we did anything look at this idea. But in our proposal, I mean, we see that as a major driving factor in the need for looking at this area in a more holistic way. Just because it's really going to change the way a lot of regional traffic is moving through Duluth. And of course, with that final destination point being within this study area, I think it'll be very important to make sure that, you know, those people who are going to be arriving here on foot have safe and convenient and obvious ways to get around the downtown area once they arrive. So it's definitely in the back of our minds as we're thinking about things.
One thing I should mention, one of the things we've been talking to MnDOT about in terms of a next step research is doing kind of this same process, but looking really more specifically at some of those potential design concepts. So how much space would be created under like a concept where we were narrowing the freeway versus capping the freeway versus, some other maybe design. And then what would be the most likely developments that might happen in those spaces given the needs of the community, but also given like what's possible under current MnDOT rules, because the state does have guidelines about what types of developments can occur. So I think that might be one of the next steps that we might consider.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name's Atlee. I was just curious, you mentioned that like it took a while for private investments to materialize in the peer cities you mentioned. Do you have any specifics on like were they trying to develop a lot of housing like it's kind of needed in Duluth, or was it mostly mixed use, or like I don't know, just what kind of things were they trying, and is there anything potentially unique about Duluth, or that might kind of change, I guess. Thank you.
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember, I mentioned the Niagara Falls example where they had of the 5 cities that we looked at, Niagara Falls was definitely the outlier in terms of their priorities. They were really, using the space just for green space and very little actual business development. The other 4 communities all were much more focused on developing the space for, retail or business or housing, what have you. I don't recall specifics, but I remember one of the cities was really strategizing, having the space be like an educational hub for healthcare, I think, kind of innovation. And so again, I think it really depended on the city's strategy. So I guess I'm not sure if what Duluth's strategy might be. Housing definitely emerged as one of the needs, but it wasn't like a clear winner. There was lots of different economic development opportunities that people mentioned. So that didn't really answer your question that well, but but I think one of the things is just that these large development projects, I think, just take a lot of time in general from start to finish.
There's another question here, Monica. Sorry if I missed this, but is climate pollution, GHG emissions, a factor of consideration? And from what I recall, being on at least one interview and maybe a couple where pollution came up, particularly with designs, and I'm not, obviously I'm not an expert in this, but designs that slow down below 55 miles an hour, which is the optimal speed, from my understanding, that has the lowest amount of emissions. That was raised a couple of times by some folks. So that did arise there, but I don't know. Do you have any further examples to point to for that, Monica?
Yeah, I would say we had a mixture of comments on both the positive and negative in terms of potential environmental impacts. So some people said they were supportive of the project because they saw it as an opportunity to, increase green space or make the area more like of a natural habitat, while other people saw the a potential right sizing as possibly negative because of air pollution concerns, like John was just talking about, with emissions from slower moving vehicles being a source of air quality problems.
So this is Dave Royce. I've got a question about who actually owns the land. So when you're freeing up all this space, I mean, at this point, is it the federal government, or does the city of Duluth have property rights? Or, it seems like that's a pretty important consideration in terms of what's going to be developed and who gets to decide, and the value.
My understanding is that MnDOT owns the land, but I think they are limited in what they can do, but it sounds like they are always considering like new and innovative land uses for their right-of-way land, but they do have certain limitations on how they can use it.
And I know, just looking at the case studies that were, studied in this project, there are quite a few different ways that DOTs have, transitioned the land away from their ownership. Sometimes it's purely, private sale of land at market value. In other instances, I know things like community land trusts have been considered in terms of ownership and management of the space. Sometimes they're transferred to, the city or another government agency who then will handle the apportionment and sale of the land. But at this point, for this project, there's no, planned method of that. We're still just trying to, figure out if it's the right choice to make. So
I want
hopefully that
to,
helps.
thanks, Jordan. I want to point out a couple of comments that have come in here as well. Dale Bergeron has had some good thoughts here on his ideas. And Peter had made a comment here that slower vehicles equal, meaning more emissions is outdated by many years. And I wanted to point out that Monica and I don't have a stake in this, in what direction we're sort of, what we hopefully unbiased researchers. We're just bringing you the data that we learned through this work here. So, and Mary had a question about the distance from the highway in the scope of the project, and I think, what was it, one mile? Was it a 1 mile radius from?
It was, I think, a half a mile radius in either direction. So it was, the land area specifically was a little less than a 1 square mile because of the lake being part of it.
Yeah, that's right. So it was great. Thank you.
But yes, Mary, from Mesaba Avenue to the tunnels, and then with about a half a mile radius in either direction, which was what we, when we did our interviews, we asked about impacts outside of those areas as well. We asked the people that we spoke to about their concerns or hopes for economic development, or how the project might impact other communities in Duluth beyond this small study area. But when we were, kind of grounding them in the scale of our project, we said, this is the focus area that we're really interested in learning more about.
Another question is data collection on the freeway pollution plume being collected or on the table to be collected? I have no idea.
Not by us, but that might be part of the Metropolitan Interstate Council study, perhaps. They are doing much more of a transportation traffic study. So our study was really just focused on the economic side of it. But I would guess that if that was being collected, it would be done by them.
I guess I can add a little bit on that, being the representative from the MIC. I know that air quality and congestion related air quality is, I think, part of the project. I'm not sure to what extent. The study is more or less being led by Chris Liljebald in our office. And yes, our study is much more transportation related and has a little bit wider scope. We're not focusing just on downtown. It's all the way from Cloquet to 26th Avenue East.
I'm not sure you're coming through. I can't hear what's being said right now.
Is everybody able to hear me?
Yeah, Prescott, you're just very quiet.
Oh, all right. I'll try to speak louder. I can follow up on that for you. That's the summary.
Did you say you were going to follow up with us? That's what I heard, Prescott. So I think that's what we'll move forward with. Great.
One thing
Also-
that I saw in the study that I thought was interesting and something that comes up a lot in terms of, questions we get asked is, how much is this going to cost if we were to do some sort of reconfiguration? And, what are the short-term impacts in terms of, job creation and things like that?
Yeah, our team did do a small economic impact analysis, just based on the construction cost, the average construction cost for the other peer cities that we looked at. So for those cities, the average construction cost for a 1-year project was $50 million. And that was based on the average cost per mile for the other projects, because of course they were all varying distances. And given that $50 million price tag, we estimated that the project would support 450 jobs, $29 million in wages and benefits, and $39 million to the study area's gross domestic product. So that would be like the initial impacts from a construction project itself, a freeway construction. And yes, for us, the information that I just stated, all of that is in the report. I also just wanted to acknowledge our U Spatial department at UMD at the Twin Cities, U of M Twin Cities campus. Stacy Stark and her team contributed the spatial analysis for the peer cities. So their team evaluated that half-mile radius that I mentioned for Duluth, but they did that for all of the other peer cities, and then looked at like new business creation and other economic activity that happened between those time periods for the other peer cities. So that's also in the study.
If anyone is interested and, just individually or one-on-one, if they want to talk more about it, I'll certainly volunteer myself. You're welcome to get in touch with me, and yeah, I'm always up for a good chat if you want to chew on something a little bit.
Yeah, John and I really enjoyed working on this project, and hope to be able to continue doing more work in this area, because it's just what we found from everyone. Oftentimes what I find doing a lot of survey research is it's so hard to get people to participate in surveys, and you have to like twist their arm to agree to talk to you. And this project, I mean, we had such a huge response from people, and people would reach out to us and say, can I participate in this survey? How can I be involved? I want to be interviewed. I want to talk to you about the project. So it was really refreshing to be working on a project that had so much engagement in the broader community and the business community, and everyone that we talked to was really passionate about it. So it was really fun to be a part of.
I put contact information for Monica and myself, and but I do not have a D in my email address, and up here in UMD country, I get that mistake gets made quite a bit.
Okay, does anyone have any further questions on the specific study at this point? And if not,
I did put a link to the study in the chat, but I will make sure, Jordan, I'll send it to you and you can share it with everyone who attended today.
great, thank you.